Hi, I'm Wanza, and in today's video we're going to be discussing the history of the Zambian economy, all the way from independence up until the struggles that we face today in 2025. Now in this video, I'm going to attempt to answer a few questions. How did we get here? And during this whole period from independence in 1964 all the way up until today in 2025, has there ever been a time that we've done it right? What are some of the choices that we've made that have led us up until this point? Now, as you may or may not agree with me, the Zambian economy right now is not seated in a good place, especially compared to other currencies. So, is it the choices that we've made that have led us here? Well, stick with me up until the end of this video to see if at all I can present a good case to you about how we got to this point. Now, I have a little disclaimer. If you're the type of person that looks at each and every topic that is brought for discussion in a political lens, I would rather you leave this video immediately. If you're a pressing or whatever that it is that you call yourselves, I don't want you on this video. I don't have time for you. But if you are an open-minded youth that's willing to learn and just discover and discuss and have those uncomfortable conversations, this is the video for you, and follow me as we dismantle this topic. So to set the stage, we have to just gain a little bit of an understanding on how economies actually develop. In today's video, I'm going to use Rostow's takeoff model. It's basically just the 5 stages of economic growth. It's a very simple model. Each and every one of us can easily understand it. So the first stage in this particular model is a traditional society, which according to the sharks, this is how all economies start. And during this stage of the economy, there is not much productivity because there is no technology and everything like that. So this is just a traditional society that thrives on mostly agriculture and things like that. Then there is preconditions to take off. Now these preconditions to take off are where now huge investments like industrialization is invested into the economy. But if you're an African or a Zambian, this stage should not excite you, because this is where some of the most darkest tactics have been placed against our economy. The third stage is actually the takeoff stage, and this is where you often see fast growth, especially based around one resource. In our case, that's copper. Then the fourth stage is drive to maturity. This is where an economy actually matures. It begins to diversify, like investing in other sort of sectors like agriculture and things like that, right? And then the epicenters of economic activity are not just concentrated in either one or two centers. In our case, those are provinces. Then the fifth stage is the age of mass consumption, which is what we're still trying to shoot for as a Zambian economy. Whether we like it or not, the two most active economic centers are the Copper Belt and Lusaka. Yes, there's a little bit of some economic activity in Livingstone and all these other places, but the two epicenters are Copper Belt and Lusaka. When an economy reaches full maturity, this is a stage for widespread prosperity, where prosperity can be found at each and every corner of our society. In our case, these are provinces. We would expect that each and every province would be an epicenter of economic activity. According to this model, this is when an economy has reached full maturity. But whether we like it or not, this is not our making. This is not the type of economy that we originally had. Let's talk about that second stage that I told you about that has got a little bit of a dark truth behind it. The preconditions to take off. Now we have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable truth of this particular stage, especially us here in Africa. Look, whether we like it or not, Zambia's traditional society was just doing well on its own. This is a society that lived decades and decades and decades and just thrived in its own way. Trade was going on. We had economic activity at Ingombe, so this was an already thriving society. But then the economic hitmen came in. These paid professionals, they did more than just invest. They used unfair tricks to change our society. They brought in ideas and systems that would weaken our local ways while in the back end plundering our wealth. Look, the economic hitmen came into our economy with promises of progress. Instead, they broke down our local traditions and systems, which had supported us for generations. They introduced new education systems. These ideals made the youth to look down on their own tradition and depend on foreign forces. And sadly, this left them skillless and able to build their own futures. So even a 5-year-old now knows that we have very, very huge resources in our land. These economic hitmen came into our economy, infiltrated our economy, bought the resources for cheap, and funneled all the money all the way back to their own countries and banks, leaving this whole society with nothing to show for. So they might look at our traditional society as non-thriving, has got no technology, but it was a thriving society. what they've introduced just leaves people working from paycheck to paycheck until they die. In short, the process meant to help our economy ended up damaging the very foundations and the fabric of our society. These economic hitmen destroyed the fabric of our community. And that's part of the reason why we find ourselves in the position where we're at today. So, how did this all go down? Well, even before independence, most of our economy and most of our economic activity, especially the fact that we depended mostly on mining and copper, they were run by foreign entities, mostly the BSAC, the British South African Corporation. This was run by that guy, we've heard of him, Cecil Rhodes, I don't know what his name is, but yeah. Those were the guys that were controlling the mining sector, plundering our resources, funneling them all the way to Britain while leaving our society with nothing. So when we gained independence in 1964, Zambia just gotten back the mineral rights from BSSC. They sold it for at least £200,000. So we had the mineral rights. But still, as much as we had the mineral rights, we still were not in touch with our wealth, because we still gave these guys the power to manage what was producing our wealth at that time, which was mainly the mines. They were still the ones managing those mines and were still demanding a fee to pay them for managing those mines, while at the same time extracting the resources, taking them to their countries at a very, very cheap price. A very, very messed up deal if you ask me. So this just kept on going. Even when companies like Anglo-American came in, the conditions were still just the same. Anglo-American was still on a consultancy deal, so whichever way that you skin it, they will still plunder resources, drive them back to America, at the same time charge the government consultancy fees to manage the mines. So the government ended up making much of nothing, as much as they were getting the taxes and royalties from the mineral rights. So as you can see, President KK or Kenneth Kaunda still started at a very big disadvantage. He tried as much as possible to negotiate to get those mineral rights back. He tried as much as possible to infuse the society and equip his society to be able to manage those mines, but unfortunately still didn't do much of a good job. So in 1968, President Kenneth Kaunda introduced the Mulungushi reforms. Now the idea for this is for government to take stake in most of these foreign-owned companies. They would take like 51% stake. Their reason for not taking the whole 100% was that they still wanted those foreign entities to still have some part of the ownership so that they can be able to transfer skills into the local people. Now, whether that was a right decision or not, I've got no idea. But personally, I feel like these were a cancer that just needed to be eradicated from our society so that we can begin to learn. We didn't have to depend on them too much, because trying to negotiate with them is still playing their game, which is a lose-lose. So as expected, these Mulungushi reforms yielded nothing. So still, in the same timeline, like from 1979 to 1983, a couple of other very, very important events also happened. So for example, in 1973 to 1975, there was the oil and copper crisis. So this was brought about by the OPEC. OPEC simply means Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. And these guys formed a cartel that led into this whole rise of the oil prices and fall of the copper prices. Since copper was our main resource that was contributing to the growth of our economy, you can imagine how that went. So this was just a cascading form of events, because the fall of copper prices also led to the foreign exchange crisis. That was in 1976. So, like as any leader would do, this is your economy is failing. Imagine you're President Kenneth Kaunda, your economy is failing. So you sit down, have a board, and come up with what is called the Third National Development Plan. But unfortunately, since the global market was tanking because of these high oil prices, the forex crisis and all that, this good plan, which was trying to diversify the economy, think agriculture, manufacturing and things like that, failed to take off. Because to be able to sustain the economy, unfortunately the government was led into excessive borrowing. All these state-owned institutions just became inefficient, bloated machines that were ineffective. So as you can imagine, President KK was sitting on a ticking time bomb. Add to that the debt crisis of 1983, where most developing countries were fully indebted. We were headed nowhere fast. And so, in 1983, the IMF swooped in. They came in with the New Economic Recovery Program. But as good as the name sounds, this was ugly. Some of the conditions in this program were: 1. Public service cuts. This slashed healthcare and education and hit the poorest the hardest. The government was forced to privatize. This means they sold off state assets to mostly foreign-owned companies who bought these at very, very cheap prices. So as you can imagine, the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. Look, the IMF pitched this as a road to our recovery, but it was a wrecking ball. our kwacha crashed against the dollar and the euro. In 1980s exchange rates, the currency was 2 kwacha to $1, which is good based on today's standards because currently we're almost at 30 kwacha to $1. Imagine that. But this was just the start because in the 90s it was almost 10 to 1. This was just numbers on a chart. It was Zambians watching their savings evaporate in real time. So as you can see, so far, our economy has just been taking a beating. But in the early 2000s, of course, you knew that we had President Levi Mwanawasa. Most of you, I know you were not like fully up and aware at that time. Most of you were not even born by that time. But this guy worked hard to clean up the economy. He was very fortunate because in his time, the copper prices started to rise again. And there was also help with debt relief programs. This was a guy that instituted a proper debt restructuring program. And his governance was very tight on corruption. So his government was very, very efficient. So at this particular time, the Zambian economy was doing very, very well. During this time, I was barely a teenager, so I wasn't aware enough to be able to make a killing during this time. But the people that were economically active and did make a killing during this time, shame on you. So it was very, very unfortunate, but President Levi Mwanawasa died, unfortunately, without completing his full 10 years. And if he did, I think Zambia would be at a different stage right now. But President Rupiah Banda took over from 2008 all the way up to 2011. And he also continued with the same policies that President Levi Mwanawasa had, but he wasn't as sophisticated and as strategic as President Levi Mwanawasa. So the economy escaped him just a little bit because during his time, the kwacha was like 5 to 1. So he left the economy at $1 was like 5 kwacha, thereabout, right? So he focused on building infrastructure, hospitals, things like that, which was very, very good. But unfortunately, these come at a cost because we are borrowing money in order to build those infrastructure, right? And then inflation in his time was about 14%, which was also very, very bad. Ultimately, the currency just continued suffering. So from 2011 to 2014, that was the time of President Michael Sata, right? And he also continued with the issue of infrastructure and things like that, which again was also coming at a cost of more borrowing. And the more we borrow, the more we depend on these guys, the IMF and all, calling them back into our economy to come and impose these harsh conditions. So during this time, I don't know if you're able to remember, but the dollar to kwacha exchange rate was like 8 to 1, which again was very, very unfortunate because this is slowly taking a hit, slowly losing value. But again, unfortunately, President Michael Sata also died without actualizing some of these things that he wanted to do. One of the things that I was very, very impressed by that he wanted to implement was actually building a ruby processing plant right here in Zambia, which was going to be very, very good. It was going to be good for the exchange rates. But unfortunately, all that didn't come to fruition because he died. But then President Lungu took over, who also just continued with President Michael Sata's policies, which again, like I said, were about infrastructure development. And as we've learned so far, as we've discussed in this whole thing, by now you know that infrastructure development comes at the cost of getting more debt to a level where, combined with those public funds mismanagement and things like that, it got so unsustainable that in 2020 Zambia became the first country to default over this debt repayment, which led the Zambian kwacha into a very, very bad spiral, ending up to a level where it was 18 to 1. So 18 kwacha, that was like $1, unfortunately. By the time President Lungu was leaving office, the ratio was 21 to 1. So that's 21 kwacha to $1. I'm sure you can see how the economy is taking a hitting. And also, unfortunately, with all that mounting up, there was also the COVID-19 pandemic, which led the economy to a halt. Some people up to now have not even recovered from the impact of the COVID-19 because it took a lot of businesses out. Most of them just shut down. So right about now in 2025, we're under the HH administration, and this particular administration has also instituted a debt restructuring deal with the IMF. They've again gone and called on the devils to come back again and make our economy to suffer some more, which is very, very unfortunate because what these guys have actually done again is some of the conditions that they implemented was to remove the fuel and agricultural subsidies, which led to the shooting up of the prices of these commodities, which at the current moment are very, very unaffordable, plus the high inflation. And at this particular moment, the kwacha to the dollar is about like 28 to 1, which is very, very unfortunate. And in March, where we're sitting at, this is the 21st March, 10 days from now, there's gonna be introduction of bigger notes into the economy. What that signals is that we're surrendering to inflation. Now, if that move will help the Zambian economy or not, I guess we'll find out. As much as we've been squeezed with all these issues that I've presented to you, the borrowing still has not stopped. Even the current government is still continuing to borrow, unfortunately. If by 2030 something or 2035 we are seated at 50-1 in terms of the Zambian kwacha to US dollar ratio, for me I can't be surprised because we are seated at a ticking time bomb. So looking back, our fate really has been shaped by mostly the foreign forces, or I call them economic hitmen. These have come in with very unfair policies, especially those tied with the IMF, right? But I think it's time for us to face the music. It's time for us to face the hard truth and start rebuilding. So, let's start a conversation. What steps can we take to break this cycle? How can we build an economy that truly works for Zambia? Share your thoughts in the comment box below. I'll be responding to each and every comment. Whether you agree or disagree with what I've presented below, your comments are welcome as long as you're not depressing, looking at everything in a political lens. So if you found this video eye-opening and you've learned a few things or two how we got to this position and what we did to do things right at some point, give me a like, share, subscribe, and if you are a youth vying for office, this is the time to take the mantle. We can defeat these old dates. Alright, God bless, be great, see you in the next one.